If you have been in the church for any amount of time, you've heard somebody say this. I'll pray about it, right? Sometimes as Christians, we aren't exactly the most honest. I'll give you some good examples, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Hey, how are you doing? I'm doing great. Here's another example. I'll pray for you. Next week comes around, dang it, I forgot to pray for you. And here's another good example. Somebody asks you to do something, and what you mean to say is no, but somehow all that you're able to muster out of is, I'll pray about it. And maybe we really do mean to, but, we forget. And, hey, it's the thought that counts anyways. And, maybe we don't really think that prayer is going to do anything anyways. Let's just, all agree to move on or something, But after 16 years in ministry, there's one thing that I've really learned. And I think this might have been the only thing that I've learned because, I knew everything. It's a joke, because young guys go to college and they think that they know everything. Don't tell me you've never had a son that went to college. Come on. College kids know everything. Didn't you know that? They know how to fix the world. They know how to solve all the problems. I mean, they just know everything. All those of you who have had a kid that went to college, you're thinking, yeah, I know what you're talking about. All you who don't, you're like, I don't know what he's talking about. But anyways, this is something that I really, really, really did learn, and that's prayer might be the single most important thing that I can ever do as a pastor. I do a lot of things in any given week. There's a lot of things that are very important to do. But prayer is one of those things that there's just no substitute for it. That's actually one of the things that we were talking about in young adults class last week, is that sometimes we try and shortcut a relationship with God. We don't really want to put forth the time to read the Bible and to pray and that kind of stuff. And but prayer might be the single most important thing that I can do, and that any of you can do too. And here's the part that really flabbergasts me. Yes, I said flabbergast. I believe that actually is a word too. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. But here's something that really did flabbergast me, is that prayers are really, prayers accomplish much, but not because of the words that are spoken. That's something that took me a long time to learn. Your words mean almost next to nothing. It's the God who answers the prayer that makes prayer something that's very beneficial. A lot of people have made a lot of money selling a lot of things to people, and one thing that you see people selling is, I have the secrets to answered prayers, and, if you utter these secret words, or if you do these secret things, and all. Don't really buy into that stuff. It's this simple. When you humble yourself and talk to God, He is just good and He listens. I don't know how that translates over, but that's just kind of the way it works. So what happens when we don't pray? Well, there's actually a lot of things that happen when we don't pray. The first thing that happens when we don't pray is we get prideful. I can do it. I got it covered. I don't really need God. Totally fine. I can figure my way through this. The second thing that happens when we don't pray is we forget our place in the world. What God has called me to do. You know what I mean? We forget what God wants me to do. You know what I mean? We think, okay, I don't need to pay attention to having a purpose in my life. You know what I mean? You kind of get what I'm saying? Kind of like a pastor. Let's say a pastor, okay? I might forget that I'm called to be a pastor and start just being a jerk to people. See what I mean? I might forget that I'm called to serve people and instead start thinking that people need to serve me. See what I mean? Just kind of forgetting my place in the world. And then what happens is we start praying from this kind of a position. And once again, a lot of false teachers have made a lot of money on the television doing stuff like this. Hey, if you just decree this, so will it be. It's like, okay, well, they're stealing your money from you. And another thing that happens when we don't pray is we forget God's power. Have you guys ever seen Star Wars? The power of the dark side of the Force. It's kind of like that, except, God. We forget that God is all-powerful. We think, okay, I have to solve this problem. I have to have all the answers. And then we start doing stuff out of our arrogance. Like, here's a good example. My kids, okay? So instead of I start thinking that it's all up to me. You know what I mean? Like, it's not God who's going to be working in my kids. No, it's all about me. I have to do everything perfect. And I forget God's power to work in my kid's life, to change my kid's heart. And I start thinking that I have to change your heart. See what I mean? Pastors do the same things too. I have to do a good enough sermon. I have to, live a good enough life so that way everybody will, let God change them. And it doesn't work like that. It's the Holy Spirit that has to change people. And leaders worry about those people that they serve. They want them to make good choices. They want them to not be fooled by false shepherds and that kind of stuff. And parents do the exact same thing. They worry about their kids. They want them to live a good life. They want them to make good decisions. They've lived a little bit longer, and they realize one big mistake can really stick with you through your life, and you want them to make the right ones. You know what I mean? You want them to make the right choices. And sometimes we excuse this by saying, well, I don't really worry. I'm just concerned. Okay. Call it whatever you want. If you're up all night thinking about it, that's worry. Leaders do have to keep out wolves. They have to keep out false, shepherds, false prophets, those kinds of things. Absolutely. But parents have to train and teach their kids as well. Now, amidst all those problems and busyness of life, we sometimes think that it's all up to us, that somehow I have to do everything perfect in order for things to go right. Yet here's the real thing that melts my mind a little bit. Yet neither parents nor leaders can make someone else's decisions for them. If you've had kids, you know this. You want to train and think about this. You see a bratty kid in Walmart, right? They throw themselves on the ground. Well, they should control their kid, right? And it's a natural process we all think of, but something that we don't realize is that idea is an attitude of pride. If it was my kid, I would be able to handle it perfectly. Okay, well, let's see what happened with your kids. See what I mean? And, oh, no, well, if it was my kid, well, what happened with your kids? Did you do everything perfect when you were a parent? And the world's best parents, those who don't have kids. I was talking to this one guy. He did have kids. He did have kids, but he wasn't around to raise them. And he was sitting there talking to me, and he said, oh, this person's doing this wrong with how they parent and this wrong with how they parent. And I was just thinking, how would you know? You didn't raise any of your kids. But, and the same is true for people who don't have kids. You know all the answers. You've read all the books, maybe. You just you're going to be the world's best parent, and your kids are never going to mess up. They're just going to they're going to be the president of the United States. You know what I mean? Or NHL, or, whatever, that. And it doesn't really work like that, because you can't make someone else's decisions for them. Your children, your church, your friends, your family, they'll all do things that you don't like sometimes. And I think that that's really a hard thing to grasp in life, because life seems so uncertain. We want to make sure that we get the result that we want, and then we realize it's not really up to us. It's obviously the parent. It's up to the parent to discipline and correct and those things, absolutely. But the child still has to choose. You can't, for instance, force your child to believe in God. You can't force them to obey God, right? When they move out of your house, you can't force them where they live, what decisions they make, right? I mean, so long as they're under your house, you have a little bit of leeway there. I mean, obviously, you still can't make them believe in God. Like, so long as you live in my house, you will believe in God. You know what I mean? There's still some limit there too. But it's still the child's right, right to have to choose. What we do is we get ourselves all wrapped up in it. If I had just done this differently, then that wouldn't have happened. This person wouldn't have betrayed me if I would have done this differently. My kid wouldn't have done this if I would have just done this. This wouldn't have happened if I would have just done this. Well, let's stop that nonsense. Here's the thing. Every single person who I have ever chased down and pandered to try to appease them, they left anyways, as a pastor. Because, and this is something that took me a long time to understand, it was inevitable that they left. Well, what do you mean? Well, let me explain. They didn't make the choice to grow, to learn, to not be offended. I couldn't make that choice for them. You see grown people trying to make their grown children make certain decisions and try to make the decisions for them still to this day. You got, a 40-year-old man living in your basement, and you're like, well, I'm still trying to make his choices for him. And it's like, it doesn't work. Everybody has to make their own decisions at a certain point. And that's a little bit hard. That's a little bit hard because we like to hold on to life like this. Have you ever driven with my dad in Mexico? It's the exact same look that I've got on my face right now. Oh, he is a fright. I made the promise to myself years ago, and when he comes back, he's going to say something like this. Oh, I drive fine in Mexico. You don't believe him? You don't believe him, okay? You'll get stuck in Juarez like I did with him being the driver. Oh, no, no, no. No, no, no. And so, and so we have this idea that if I had just done so-and-so right, that everything would have worked out. But it doesn't work like that. I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and I'll leave people's names, out of it. There was a person who I was attempting to lead, I guess you could say. I don't know if I ever really led them, but I tried. And they came to me in tears. They were all bent out of shape, and I thought, oh man, something big has happened. Somebody really did something bad. This person's sitting too close to me. What do you mean? Well, this person's sitting too close to me. I said, well, why don't you just move over? Because it won't work, and tears and distraught. And I said, okay, all right. So I fixed it. I moved them apart, and the problem was solved, right? Wrong. A couple weeks later, there was something else that they were all distraught about. You see what I mean? And then eventually what happened? Well, they left the church. Why? Because they had the idea that I'm not going to get over it. I'm not going to grow. I'm going to be offended. I just had to find something to be offended about. You know what I mean? And it actually happens quite frequently. And the thing is, we think it'll never happen to me, and then it does happen to us. You have to the thing about the church is it's a great idea when it's actually put into practice. You have to be vulnerable with people, and you have to forgive people. People aren't going to do things your way, and instead of sitting around demanding, you have to do it my way, you have to budge on stuff and say, okay. That's hard, especially as a pastor. There's sometimes as a pastor, oh boy, when you ask somebody to do something and you're kind of a perfectionist and they don't do it the way that you would have done it, so you're just like, okay, it's all right. It's okay. It doesn't have to be done my way. Oh, plus I'll do it when they leave. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Just joking. Just joking. Just joking. Anyways, because here's the thing, and I really want you guys to get this. They have to make their own decision. Now, you might say, now, what's your point? Now, I'm getting to it. Don't rush me. Golly, it's like going for a bike ride. I'm just having fun here. When the cat's away, the mice will play. Well, so okay. I'm just kidding. I'm joking again, guys. Jeez. I didn't have a joke at the beginning of this like Dad always does, and I thought, will they be disappointed? And I said, of course they're going to be disappointed. Dad's not here. So I'm going to tell them the one joke that I know. And if you notice, there's a blank screen at the beginning. That was it. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise, they listen to advice. And another example is Israel coming out of Egypt. If you guys have been reading the Bible through us, this happened in the book of Exodus. And so what happens there? God brings the people out of Egypt, out of slavery, and everything's fine. No. They worship idols. They don't listen to God. They do all kinds of stuff. It's like they go from one problem to another. See, God could free them from slavery, but he didn't make their choices for them. It was still their choice whether to obey or not. And they chose not to. Another example, a good example besides this, throughout the Old Testament law, God gave warnings to Israel. Hey, for instance, hey, when you get a king, watch out that he doesn't do this. And then he did it anyways. Spoiler alert. If you've never read the book of Samuel's and 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, sorry. So if you've never read it, then I just really, I ruined the ending. I'm really sorry. Anyways, when you get to those two books, you find out that they do it anyways. And so God's warnings didn't really stop Israel. And, think about that. We still do the same things. Think about the book of Numbers, for instance. Korah goes up to Moses and he says, you're not more righteous than us. We're just as good as you. Isn't it the same thing we do nowadays? I mean, I thought this before I became a pastor, but then afterwards I realized how true it is. People go up to pastors all the time, and it's like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Well, anyways. See, Anne is an antagonizer. Yeah, have me say it while I'm the one standing up here. Great idea, Anne. Real great idea. Anyways, well, moving on. So you can't make people's decisions for them. That takes us to the second point before we get going on the main idea here. When you tell them all this, they will not listen to you. When you call to them, they will not answer. This is God talking to the prophet Jeremiah. And he tells them, hey, go and tell them this, but they're not going to listen to you. So why am I wasting my time, God? Why are you having me go out there and tell these people this when they're not even going to listen? And that brings us to the second of these 2 points. It's not all up to us. We like to think that everything's all up to us, right? If our kids are going to make it right, it's up to us to do everything perfect. Well, geez, that's not a huge weight to have to carry. Have you ever been a parent? How long did it take before you messed up? About a half of a day? Did you ever lose your temper with your kid? Oh, no, they're perfect angels. Wait till they get older. Man, oh, man. And then they start doing stuff behind your back, and you start figuring out that they're their own person, and they start doing things like lying to you, and you're like, that's not cool. I wiped your butt. It's just a little bit of a wake-up call, I guess. And the thing is, it's not all up to us. We do our job, right? We do our job. And I'm trying to keep a straight face while Lauren's over here laughing so hard. I'm really trying. Lauren, you're making it really hard. Please stop. We do our job. We encourage, we correct, we guide. But check it out. But only God can change hearts. As a parent, you do your job. You parent your kids. But don't think that it's all up to us. You. It's not a group project here. Don't think that it's all up to you. And also, don't forget that you can't make their decisions for them. Very difficult thing to learn. Even if you do everything right or say everything right, now here's the part that's going to hurt. Bad things will still happen, and others still do what they are going to do. Okay? So I want you to take all that guilt you have from not being the perfect parent or the perfect leader, and we just let it go. Just let it go. It wasn't ever all up to you. Okay? That's right. Try your best, but realize you're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. And realize as you let this go that your kids had to make their own decisions regardless of how good or how bad of a parent you are. And see, kids are master manipulators. They learn it at about age 1, and they just carry it on through. And they'll say something to you like this: it's your fault that this happened. It's your fault that... If you're a grown person, a grown human being, okay, it's now up to you. Let's say your parents were the worst people in the world. I'm not going to argue how good of a parent your parents were. It's over and done with. You are now an adult. What are you going to do with it? That's a hard thing to grasp because we like to blame other people for our problems rather than just work through our problems. Leaders do it too. Oh, well, it's this person's problem that this idea didn't work out, and this person's problem. It's like, well, or it wasn't a good idea, or it wasn't the right time, or whatever. Move on. They still have to make up their choice, and it's not all up to you. God is still going to have to do something. The same as God is working in your life. Now, this is the part that really catches us off guard. Okay, so God is working in our life, right? So then God is working in their life too. You cannot protect your kids or your church or whoever from the reality of life. You can't. It's not going to happen. Pastors try to do this all the time. We want people to make the right choices, so we try and make sure that, all this, and it's like, well, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Some things you guys have to learn by your own experience, just like some things my kids have to learn by their own experience. I can't teach that to them. But God is working, and He is in control, even though it might not seem that He is. Now, this is the part where our logic kind of blinds us. Okay, so God's in control, but I don't see it, therefore God's not in control. See what I mean? We kind of follow this faulty line of reasoning. Did you know that you don't see everything that's going on in the entire world, and you don't see what's going on in other people's hearts? I really hate to tell you that. But if you haven't learned it by this point, I feel like I should tell you that. God is always working, regardless of whether or not you see something or not. And this is something that really blew me away from 2020, 2021, this whole fiasco. God is not worried about the situation. What? Yes, it's true. He's not sitting on the edge of his seat with bated breath. He's not like, oh no, what's going to happen? Who's going to be elected? He's not worried about it, okay? He's not worried about politics. He's not worried about all these different things that we were so worried about. He's not worried about the news either. You know how you get up every day and read the news just to scare yourself and make yourself feel like the world is a terrible place and nothing good ever happens? Maybe you should stop doing that, by the way. God doesn't do that, okay? You know, when God doesn't just sit there scrolling down Facebook and, she posted what? So, I mean, I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of courage and hope there. So now that we've talked about you can't make other people's decisions for them, and it's not all up to you, now let's go to the real meat and potatoes of today. Philippians 4:6. Do not be anxious about anything. Well, see, this verse can give you a lot of hope or it can give you a lot of anxiety. I can't be worried about anything, but I am worried about everything, so that means that there's something wrong with me. And it's like, okay, this is meant to encourage you, okay? Stop trying to twist it into like a guilt trip. Oh, I'm just not good enough. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Okay, well, let's look at this. First off, don't make your whole life revolve around the problem that you're dealing with. You're going to go through problems. It's going to happen. Don't make your whole life revolve around it. So how about this? Pray about it, but also remember to be thankful for what God has done and for what God is doing. Right? Isn't that what it says? Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, skip that line, present your request to God, but with thanksgiving. Let's focus on just that part now, with thanksgiving. What do I have to be thankful for? Well, that attitude right there shows how much your perspective really needs to change, because God has done things in your past. God is doing things now. You might not see it, but that doesn't mean that he isn't. And if there's something going on right now in your life that has so captivated your attention that you are unable to see all of God's goodness, well, think about what he's done in the past. Well, he's never done anything good to me. Well, okay, fine. If you want to be that big of a grumbler, why don't you look back at what he did for Israel? Ha-ha. Got you there. Checkmate. It's recorded in the Bible. What excuse are you going to give me for that one? Anyways, so then another thing he says here is, in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your request to God. See, a lot of times what we do in prayer is we do something like this. Don't mention it. It'll give power to the thing. Just pretend like I'm fine. I believe that I'm healed, therefore I don't need to pray about it. What nonsense is this? When the Bible clearly says present your request to God, I think that God meant present your request to God. So then we do this, right? The guilt game. Well, it's such a stupid thing to pray for. Well, you're worried about it, so evidently it's not that stupid. Either way, he didn't say, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, except for the stupid ones, by prayer and petition. He didn't say that. If you're worried about it, then present your request to God. See what I mean? Praying about it is a lot different than worrying about it. So don't pretend like you don't need anything. And here's the thing. Don't forget that you are dependent on God. A lot of times we want to be independent of God. And I'll show you an example. God, I pray that you give me strength to work through this situation. That way I don't have to depend on you through this hard situation. See? You see? We do it all the time. God, help me to be a good parent, so that way I don't ever make mistakes, and I don't need you to fix anything in my family. Ha-ha. See what I mean? It's all throughout our prayers, these little things where we don't really want to depend on God. We just kind of want him to make everything perfect, so that way we don't have to depend on him. Hey, God, I make sure that my bank account never goes below fill in the blank. That way I don't have to be concerned about that. See what I mean? It's always this like preemptive strike. Like, God, I know something bad's going to happen, and I just want to not see it and not be bothered by it. But here's the thing. Instead of worrying about it, present it to God in prayer. But don't present it and only it. What happens is if you only start presenting that, and see, he didn't say only focus on that one thing. that's what we heard. We're supposed to be praying, okay? All right? We're praying. We all know this. And then he says, oh, and that thing that you're worried about, present that too. Not like in lieu of, like, I'm going to stop praying for anything else. You know, I don't care if people get saved. I don't care what happens at the church. I don't care what happens at anything. This is what I'm praying for. And it's like, well, maybe you should shift your time a little bit. So instead of worrying about it, present it to God in prayer, but not it and only it. Because here's the thing, and I really want you to get this, God is able. God is able. We go up against these hard situations. Think about it right now. The situation that you're worried about right now, think about it. It's a really hard, difficult situation, and you think, oh boy, I got to do this, and what if I do this, and if I do this? And then we start having arguments in our head. Like, if they say this, I'll do this, and if they do this, I'll do this. And I should have said this. That would have been the zinger. But it's not like that. It's more like this. Stop worrying about it. God is able. And that's really hard because once again you have to let it go. Paul talks about this. He says, "We water, we plant, but God causes the increase." So whose church is this? Well, this is God's church. Now, this is the part we have a little bit of a hard time with. Whose kids are those kids that those are God's too? You have been entrusted with them as a steward for a temporary time, but that time is limited. That's something that you have to, and see, this is something you learn, if you've ever had a child die. You learn that it's not your kid. So you do your job, but you don't trust your ability. You trust God's ability. And there's something different that happens there. You start realizing, hey, it's not up to me, it's up to God. I don't have to fix this situation. God does. And you can stand in faith knowing that God is working, that God cares for your kids or for the situation more than you yourself do. See, we get all wrapped up in us. I'm the only person who cares about my kids. Compared to God's care, your care is so small and insignificant, it's not even worth mentioning. God cares. Not because your kids did anything to earn it, but because he's good, and he's God, and that's just who he is. Gordon MacDonald wrote in a book called Ordering Your Private World, and I've paraphrased it a little bit here because the quote was way too long to include the whole thing. But he talked about the way that oftentimes when he went to prayer, he would already have the result in mind. And I know that, everybody's done this, right? Come on. You've gone to prayer before thinking already of the result that you have in mind. This is what needs to happen. And then what we do is we kind of dictate that to God and say, God, this is what you need to do because that's just the right thing to do, God, as though we know better. But the problem is in my expectations. Well, I've been let down by God or prayer doesn't work. No, your expectations were wrong. So it's not God's actions that's a problem, it's your expectations. And remember that when you go to prayer, don't give God a to-do list. He's not your spouse. He's your God. Remember that. And that's why I'm glad we don't give Jimmy a mic. All the people are online saying, what? What'd Jimmy say? Tell me. When we don't present our request to God, we don't realize it's not all up to us. We attempt to micromanage everyone into doing what we want because we think it is all about us. It's my way. This is the way we have to do it. I tell you what, if you are a control freak or a perfectionist, become a pastor. It'll either make the problem a heck of a lot worse or a heck of a lot better. So, we don't present our request to God, we start worrying. And here's the thing is we fail to see and to make God Lord of our lives. Oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm not going to hand this over to God. And we start kind of living in this little bit of a contradiction because we don't realize that it's not all about us. It's not all up to us. It's not all up to us. Have you ever tried to do something or volunteer for something and it just doesn't seem to work like you're wanting? It's just frustrating. You just start getting irritated. And then eventually you either make a decision. You either stick with it and learn and grow, or you give it up and you just get irritated and the problem is always there in the back of your head nagging you. Well, I've found a lot of times I get frustrated with the situation or with God or with people, but the real problem is that I'm just not in sync with God. I'm not seeing it in his perspective. He's saying, oh, people, love and serve them. And I'm saying, my way. I got to do things my way. Everything has to be done my way. See what I mean? And it's not going to work like that. When you have kids, a lot of parenting is just being flexible. How flexible can you be with as much drama? Especially when you have girls. Goodness sakes. I have two of them, and there's always some tragedy and screaming and yelling and, oh, Daddy, I'm just like, what could possibly be that wrong with your life? You're like 4 years old. And I know that it's only going to get worse because everybody who's had teenage girls has told me that it's going to get worse. And they keep saying, you think it's bad now? And I'm like, no. I felt like Darth Vader when he finds out Padme is dead. No. Anyways, so sometimes we just get scared to surrender control to God because it might not go how we want. Well, I get that. It probably won't go how you want. But what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you trust in God? What's the very worst thing? See, the world's not going to fall apart. It's not. The world isn't going to fall apart without you. Don't fear people who can do no more than kill your body. God is able to deliver. He might not, but either way, don't live in fear of them. So don't worry. Present your request to God. He cares more, and he is in control. So let's look at what prayer doesn't do. Prayer doesn't jerk God's hand. Prayer doesn't ensure a certain outcome. Prayer doesn't manipulate the situation. Sometimes we think that if we do all the perfect things right, that God will be forced to. He's not a slot machine, okay? What prayer does do, well, first off, it reminds you that God is in control. Second off, it gives opportunity for God to speak to you, often quietly. Often quietly. And some things God won't do, regardless of how much you pray for it. Some things God will do, regardless of how much you pray about it. And some things God will only do if you ask. Now, one more note on prayer before we close this sucker up. Wrap that burrito up and stick it in the oven. Prayer is not complaining to God. There is a very big difference. This is prayers that center on complaining. God, the situation is just terrible. Everything keeps going wrong. If you just make this person do this, I don't understand why this is going on. That's complaining. Okay, prayer is not complaining. It's listening, which requires you to humble yourself, which is, once again, a reminder that you're not in control and that you can't make other people's decisions for them. It's allowing God to change you, and it's asking. Lord, I pray that you would bless Chuck, that tonight when he's giving his message, you just give him the right words to say and help him have the discernment of, what you're trying to get across. That's a prayer. Lord, I'm really having a hard time with this. Please give me wisdom. Help me understand what I'm supposed to do in this. That's a prayer. Frustration happens, but prayer needs to not be complaining to God, but presenting a request to God, where you allow that intimacy between you and God. And that's going to take some time. You're not just going to get it overnight. So how does this apply to me? Real quick, 3 things. First off, stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to micromanage everything and stop being a control freak. Trust God. It's not going to go how you want. Just let it go. It's all right. Number 2, if we expect everything to be done our way, we're going to be disappointed. Ooh, you're going to be disappointed. When you go to God and say, God, this is how you ought to do it, he's not going to do it that way. Let me just, I can't, there's not a single time in my entire life that I have ever prayed about everything and it happened exactly how I wanted. Not one single time, except for the time that I asked God to forgive me. That did go exactly how I wanted. I was forgiven. Ta-da! And then the third thing, worry accomplishes, sorry, I thought I had that where that didn't come up with the click, but it did come up with the click. See, I'm going to master technology before it masters me, or some Yoda crap. And then the third thing, worry really does accomplish absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. You can sit and worry about something all day, but nothing's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. You're going to get gut problems. You're going to get gut problems. Your legs are going to get weakened, which is going to result in more stumbling, more falls. Okay? Especially if you're getting older, guys. Please don't be just sitting in your house watching the news, getting distraught about the situation. Get up, go for a walk. Go for a walk. Okay? Just any kind of exercise is a great idea. And, you know, it's actually a medical fact that sitting around worrying about stuff just is really, really hard on the body. I mean, that's a medical fact. If you're worried about the situation, just take a step back, breathe a little bit. It's all right. Hopefully you know where you're going when you die, right? I hope. Unless you're a sinner. No, I'm joking. Everybody calm down. Just kidding. Anyways, and another thing that worry does is it distracts us from trusting God. See, every situation that you're worried about is another opportunity to trust God. When you start looking at it like that, it changes it. It's like I was talking to somebody who had a lifelong illness, and it wasn't going to go away. And so this is what I said, you know, because they were starting to get a little bit discouraged, and I said this, look, I don't know if God's going to heal you. I don't know. I'm not God. I don't speak for God. I mean, unless he gives me a word and says, say this, then I would be speaking for God, but I'm not speaking for God right now. Here's the thing. I don't know if God's going to heal you. But I do know this, that when you go to heaven, you will be healed completely. Look at it like this. It's only a matter of time before you're healed. Maybe not in this life, but in the next one. That's hard because a lot of us carry around these wounds and hurts in our heart that nobody sees, but we feel them every day. And I have some good news. You don't have to carry it forever. It's only a matter of time before that weight is lifted. Right? So, I mean, things maybe aren't all that bad. So I guess my main idea in all this is pray about it, for real. Pray about it. Lord, I thank you for what you're doing in us and through us. I just pray that you'd help those who are going through really hard times, that they would learn how to trust you to a deeper level in this, and that you would just give them grace and mercy through it, and God, that you just help them to feel refreshed. And we just know that you're working in these situations, God. Maybe we don't see it, but we know that you're working. Maybe it's not going to be how we want, but we know that you're working. You are in control, you are able, and you're always working. Lord, I pray that you'd bless everybody as they leave today and help them to carry on your promises with them throughout the week. And, well, amen.